Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. This is episode number 11 of season 9. Today is Wednesday, July 12th, 2023. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, all right, you guys, I just wanted to say thanks so much to all of you that continue to tune in and listen in to all of my weekly Wednesday podcast drops. Now, the data does show me all of the analytics on who is actually tuning in. So did you guys know that there are 61% of you that are between the ages of 35 and 44 that tune in? 19.4% of my listeners are between the ages of 45 and 59. And then 13.9% are between the ages of 28 and 34. And then, of course, 5.6% of you are ages 60 and older. So what that tells me is, it gives me a really good indication that my platform is being utilized correctly, right? This is a totally niche space, right? In the world of medical coding, billing, auditing, and compliance. So these folks really, really care about this particular world, right? They are honed in on this niche. So I'm really, really glad to see that my podcast can help elevate all of your awareness of what's happening currently in healthcare reimbursement. So every single episode ranks so far over these 2 years in the Apple Podcast charts, somewhere in the top 100 to 150. And I always let my guests know when I feature a wonderful guest on my podcast. I let them know when they help push my rankings into the top 50 because of their guest appearance. So simply amazing. The more guests I have on my show, the higher it goes up in ranking. Simply because, again, I pick my guests from this little niche world and everybody has something to offer. And I like to roll out that red carpet from time to time and spotlight these guests as well. So again, you guys, thank you so much for continuing all of your loyal support, your loyal listening on the multiple platforms that my Paint the Medical Picture podcast is offered on. So do be mindful and definitely do subscribe and hit that like button on Spotify as well, because as of recently, Spotify for podcasters is available for me to record on. So definitely start liking and subscribing to the podcast on Spotify, as well as Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. It's everywhere. So again, you guys, thank you so much for supporting this podcast. Without all of you, I simply would have to turn the microphone off. So I appreciate that I can continue doing this from week to week. Love it. Now, anyways, you guys, let's get into today, right? This is the second Wednesday of the month, and by now you guys should know that I'm going to be unpacking the month's OIG Work Plan. So today's Newsworthy is going to be featuring the month of June. What is in June's OIG Work Plan? And then, of course, I'm going to move on in my compliance tip and my compliance recommendations today in Trusty Tip. I'm going to get into yet another item in the June 2023 CPT errata and technical corrections that was just issued for the month of June. I'm going to be focusing on special ophthalmological services. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and close out and round out today's episode in Spark with a remarkable quote on success by Dwayne Johnson. If you guys have checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and our valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve your coding accuracy as you help all your providers paint the medical picture. If you guys like what you're hearing, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, and definitely start following this podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen to my podcast, because I'd really love your continued support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips and my compliance recommendations based on my over 12 years of experience in front office, in back end, in coding, and in billing for multi-specialty physicians, in compliance, and in auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. Today's episode is sponsored by Advanced Coding Services, a leading medical billing and medical coding school in the United States. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned professional, our training equips you with the tools and support you need to advance your career. Our medical billing and coding school meets your needs worldwide online or in person with one-on-one support throughout your training. We are committed to helping our alumni and credentialed medical community in keeping up their certifications by offering various avenues for acquiring your continuing education units. In addition to our Mastering the Business of Medicine retreats offered several times throughout the year in different parts of the country, we now offer memberships. You can conveniently earn your CEUs by attending our exclusive members-only webinars. Since our aim is to nurture and grow the careers of individuals who work in the business of medicine, we call our member area the Apple Orchard. Advanced Coding Services, educate, nurture, inspire, reaching back with a hand up. So let's get into Newsworthy, the month of June's OIG Work Plan updates. Now, there are a total of 9 updates to the OIG Work Plan for the month of June. The first OIG Work Plan update is titled Audits of Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act State Grants. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Audit Services. Abuse and neglect against a child younger than 18 years old by a parent, caregiver, or another person in a custodial role can have a long-term impact on the child's health, opportunity, and well-being. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, provides funds to assist states in child abuse and neglect prevention, assessment, investigation, prosecution, and treatment activities. In federal fiscal year 2022, the Administration for Children and Families awarded $91.6 million in CAPTA state grant funding to 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico to improve their child protective services. The funds were distributed based on the relative share of the child population, which means younger than age 18. Using a risk-based approach, the OIG will conduct audits of CAPTA state grant funding to determine whether awardees complied with federal and state requirements for the intake, assessment, screening, and investigation of reports of child abuse or neglect. Now, this final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. Now, the second OIG Work Plan update for 2023 June is titled NIH Contract Closeout Process. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Audit Services. As one of the largest contracting agencies in the federal government, HHS performed contracting actions, which included awards and modifications totaling almost $39 billion in fiscal year 2022. Now, the National Institutes of Health, that's the NIH, was responsible for $8.5 billion, or approximately 22% of HHS contracting actions in fiscal year 2022. Now, the NIH invests approximately $41.7 billion annually in medical research and is the largest federal funding source for health research and development. Prior OIG work identified issues with the HHS contract closeout processes and procedures that are required once a contracting offer receives evidence of completion of the contract. Now, the closeout process includes these 3 things. Number 1, it ensures that the goods and services were provided as intended. Number 2, it validates final costs and payments. And finally, 3rd, it frees up excess funds for possible use elsewhere. The OIG will determine whether NIH closed contracts according to federal regulations and HHS policies and procedures. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. Now, the third OIG Work Plan update for June 2023 is titled Audit of Selected High-Risk Medicare Hospice General Inpatient Services. Now, this report is coming from the Office of Audit Services. Medicare pays hospices a daily reimbursement rate for each day an enrollee is enrolled to receive the hospice benefit. The reimbursement rate for hospice general inpatient or GIP care is the second highest daily rate that Medicare pays for hospice services. GIP care is provided only for pain control or acute or chronic symptom management that cannot be managed in other settings. Now, GIP care is intended to be short-term care. For this audit, the OIG will focus on claims for enrollees who were transferred to GIP care immediately after an inpatient hospital stay for a period during which the enrollee's inpatient stay reached or exceeded the geometric mean length of stay for the assigned diagnosis-related group, or DRG. These hospice GIP claims are at high risk for inappropriate billing because GIP care may exceed an enrollee's needs or may not be provided. The OIG will determine whether hospice providers that billed for GIP care complied with Medicare requirements. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2025. Now, the fourth OIG Work Plan update for June 2023 is titled Nationwide Audits of Medicare Part C High Risk Diagnosis Codes. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Audit Services. Payments to Medicare Advantage, or MA, organizations are risk adjusted on the basis of the health status of each enrollee. Medicare Advantage organizations are required to submit risk adjustment data to CMS according to CMS instructions. Miscoded diagnoses may cause CMS to pay MA organizations improper amounts. For these audits, the OIG will focus on enrollees who received diagnoses that are at high risk for being miscoded and resulted in increased risk-adjusted payments from CMS to MA organizations. The OIG will determine whether these diagnosis codes, as submitted by MA organizations to CMS for use in CMS's risk adjustment program, complied with federal requirements. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. Now, the fifth OIG Work Plan update for June 2023 is titled Medicare Payments for Clinical Diagnostic Laboratory Tests in 2022. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. Medicare is the largest payer of clinical laboratory services in the United States. Medicare Part B covers most lab tests and pays 100% of allowable charges. Under Title 18 of the Social Security Act, the Protecting Access to Medicare Act of 2014, or PAMA, requires CMS to set payment rates for lab tests using current charges in the private healthcare market. On January 1 of 2018, CMS began paying for lab tests under a new system that calculates payment rates using private payer rates mandated by PAMA. PAMA also mandates that OIG publicly release an annual analysis of the top 25 tests based on Medicare Part B spending, and that it conduct analyses that OIG determines appropriate. The OIG will analyze and report on the top 25 laboratory tests by expenditure for 2022. Now, this final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. Now, the sixth OIG Work Plan update for June 2023 is titled State Medicaid Agencies' Perspectives of Managed Care Plans Referral of Fraud. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. For Medicaid managed care, states contract with and oversee private health insurance companies known as managed care plans, which have the primary responsibility for processing, paying, and monitoring claims from providers in their networks. As such, states play a critical role in safeguarding the Medicaid program's integrity. For example, states are required to do these three things. Number one, states are required to monitor plans' compliance with the program integrity provisions of their contracts, including the provisions related to fraud referrals. Number two, states are also required to determine whether potential fraud reflects a credible allegation of fraud. And finally, third, states are required to take action against providers upon the identification of a credible allegation of fraud. According to federal regulations, states' contracts with managed care plans must require the plans to promptly refer any potential fraud waste, or abuse to state Medicaid agencies or Medicaid fraud control units. However, both OIG and CMS have ongoing concerns about states' and plans' efforts to combat fraud, including a lack of fraud referrals. This evaluation will determine whether state contractual requirements support managed care plan submission of fraud referrals, determine how states evaluate the volume and quality of the fraud referrals made by managed care plans, identify the factors that states believe incentivize managed care plans to refer fraud, and determine the challenges states face regarding fraud referrals from managed care plans. This work may also identify ways to increase the total number of managed care plans fraud referrals and ensure the quality and timeliness of these referrals. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2025. Now, the seventh OIG Work Plan update for June 2023 is titled The Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on the FDA's Domestic Food Facility Inspections. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. Food facility inspections are one of the Food and Drug Administration's, that's the FDA, most effective preventive tools for protecting public health. The Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, requires the FDA to inspect domestic food facilities at regular intervals based on risk. Domestic food facilities designated as high risk are required to be inspected every 3 years, whereas non-high risk facilities are required to be inspected every 5 years. The COVID-19 pandemic curtailed the FDA's ability to conduct required food facility inspections in 2020 and 2021 as scheduled, impacting its ability to meet FSMA mandates. Now, this review will look at the impact of COVID-19 on the FDA's domestic food facility inspections, the extent to which the FDA has completed food facility inspections within required timeframes, and how the FDA has addressed the backlog created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Even prior to the pandemic, the OIG found that the FDA faced challenges in meeting its required inspection timeframes and that the FDA did not always conduct timely follow-up of violations that were identified. This review will also determine the extent to which the FDA identified significant violations and whether the FDA conducted follow-up inspections to see if these significant violations were corrected. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. Now, the eighth OIG Work Plan update for June 2023 is titled Comparisons of Average Sales Prices to Widely Available Market Prices for the Second Quarter of 2023. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. When Congress established average sales prices, or ASPs, as the basis for Medicare Part B drug reimbursements, it also provided a mechanism for monitoring market prices for drugs covered under Part B and limiting potentially excessive Medicare payment amounts. Now, under Section 1847A, D 1 through 3 of the Social Security Act, it requires the OIG to monitor the market prices of drugs and biologicals and report its findings to CMS. If the OIG finds through its monitoring of drug prices that the ASP for a drug differs from the drug's average manufacturer price or widely available market prices, or WAMPs, by at least 5%, the Secretary may substitute the ASP-based reimbursement amount with the lower amount in the following quarter. This evaluation will determine how ASPs used to calculate Part B reimbursement amounts for single-source drugs compare to the WAMPs. The results of this evaluation could lead to changes in Part B drug payment amounts and ultimately produce savings for Medicare and its enrollees. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2023. Now, the ninth and final OIG Work Plan update for June 2023 is titled National Institutes of Health Oversight of Extramural Recipients Emergency Preparedness for Biospecimen Research. Now, this report will be coming from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. In fiscal year 2022, the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, awarded approximately $29 billion to extramural research recipients, largely through competitive grants to more than 2,500 non-federal organizations, such as universities, medical schools, hospitals, and other research facilities. During an emergency, biospecimens like blood, plasma, and tissue at these extramural research facilities may be at risk. Limited criteria for extramural recipients' emergency preparedness exists, which may make federal funds vulnerable to waste. This evaluation will determine whether and how recipients conducting biospecimens research are preparing for emergencies, and the NIH is overseeing their preparedness. Additionally, this study will demonstrate the potential costs, for example, those financial delays in research that emergencies have on biospecimen research conducted by these extramural recipients. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2025. So, all right, I know I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the results from the risk adjustment coding audit, as well as the results from the Medicaid managed care fraud referrals audit, as well as all of the others that were identified in this Newsworthy report. So I think all of these OIG work plan updates with findings are always most interesting and informative, and I certainly look forward to them coming out in the years ahead so I can continue analyzing. It's also important for my listeners to please pay attention to these monthly OIG work plan updates to see how they may impact you, your provider, or your health system. And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. So in today's compliance tip, I wanted to share another errata and technical correction that was made in June 2023 for our current CPT coding manual. So please make sure and take notes in the book that you have today for this error that was identified in the special ophthalmological services section of our CPT codebook, and that's located in the medicine section of CPT. Now, in this error, it tells us to correct the error in the medicine ophthalmoscopy subsection by restoring the missing parenthetical following code for 92227 in the printed publication that you have today in your CPT 2023 codebook. And it needs to read like this. So for CPT code 92227, for imaging of retina for detection or monitoring of disease with remote clinical staff review and report, unilateral or bilateral, make sure you include this parenthetical that was missing. Quote, include, quote, do not report 92227 in conjunction with CPT code 92133, CPT code 92134, CPT code 92228, CPT code 92229, and CPT code 92250, end quote. And finally, I focus Season 9 Spark on success. I want this 9th season Spark to be filled with our world's thought leaders, writers, artists, philosophers, everyone who inspires the need for success in all we strive to do. So in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from Dwayne Johnson. Success isn't overnight. It's when every day you get a little better than the day before. It all adds up. Absolutely true, right? I think this is an amazing quote that reminds us that success doesn't happen overnight. I think this quote inspires us to keep going each and every day. This quote reminds us to celebrate all the little wins. We make improvements and tweaks to our efforts each and every day. This quote inspires us to keep adding, to keep counting all those small achievements that we do make each and every day. They make up the fabric of our overall success. I'm happy Dwayne Johnson's spark still shines on in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. And as always, I appreciate you all diving into today with me. If you want more information from me, please go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. So in my final note today, I know I'm getting ready for yet another road trip and saving up for a really, really big trip overseas in October. And of course, I'm going to be gearing up shortly to another speaking engagement I have with Advanced Coding Services. Yes, the sponsor of today's podcast, but also where another wonderful retreat session is going to be held in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley in September. So I simply cannot wait for yet another wonderful place for folks in this little world of medical coding, billing, auditing, and compliance to receive their continuing education. And it's going to be a good time. It's going to be the autumn season in late September in the Hudson Valley for this retreat, and I simply can't wait. So for all of those of my listeners who are interested, you can simply reach out to me, find me, and connect with this amazing retreat experience that Advanced Coding Services is putting up. Once again, they had it in Adrian, Georgia in the spring. I just got back from speaking at their San Diego retreat in the beginning of June, and now I will be going back again in Hudson Valley, New York in September. So definitely check out advancedcodingservices.com for more retreat information. And if you want to utilize a direct discount code, you can always try and check out my posts on LinkedIn to make sure you apply that discount coupon code and make sure you come find us in the Hudson Valley, New York, at the end of September. So anyways, you guys, in my final note, I just wanted to make sure that life is good for all of you and make sure that you're not taking anything for granted and celebrate each and every day, whatever little or big wins that you have each and every day. Celebrate yourselves. And remember, always take time to decompress. Find time to embrace your mental health. Make sure it's just as strong as you are physically. So those are very important, friendly reminders as I close out today's episode. So anyways, you guys, thank you so much for listening in on today's episode. And I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.